My boyfriend used my money to pay his ex's rent and laughed about me being the stupid ATM girlfriend. Their lives instantly crumbled when I called the bank. I'd been dating Lucas for 2 years and thought we were building a future together, even though money was always tight for him. Lucas worked at a sporting goods store and said he was saving to go back to school for his teaching degree, which I supported completely. I made good money as a dental lab technician and didn't mind covering most of our dates and groceries since relationships were about supporting each other. Lucas moved into my apartment after 6 months because his lease ended and it made financial sense. He said he'd contribute what he could, and I believed him because he seemed genuinely embarrassed about not paying half. He gave me $200 a month toward utilities, which wasn't much, but it showed he was trying. He always talked about how his ex, Victoria, had been materialistic and demanding, and how refreshing it was that I understood his situation. He said Victoria had expensive taste and never appreciated his potential, only his wallet, which he didn't have much of. Looking back, there were signs I missed. Lucas would disappear for hours saying he was at the gym but never looked any different. He'd have cash sometimes but say it was from selling old stuff online. He'd get defensive about his phone and sleep with it under his pillow. He'd have mysterious stomach problems that required him to leave suddenly and be gone for hours. He'd know things about neighborhoods across town that he had no reason to visit. I thought maybe he was embarrassed about a second job or something harmless. Then my bank called about suspicious activity on my account. Someone had been making electronic transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, then bigger ones adding up to $8,000 over 6 months. The bank traced it to transfers Lucas had set up using my laptop when I was asleep. The receiving account belonged to Victoria Reese, his supposedly terrible ex. I confronted Lucas and he broke down crying, saying Victoria was going through a hard time. She'd lost her job and was about to be evicted, and he couldn't let her be homeless. He said she had nobody else and he still cared about her as a person. He said he knew I'd understand because I was compassionate, unlike Victoria, who would never help anyone. He actually said I should be proud that my money was helping someone in need. When I asked why he didn't use his own money, he said he didn't have any extra, which was weird since he hadn't been paying rent at my place. That's when I did some digging. Lucas hadn't been paying $200 for utilities. That money went to Victoria too. His gym membership that I thought he had was actually Victoria's yoga studio membership. The stuff he sold online was actually stuff from my apartment that I hadn't noticed missing. The teaching degree he was saving for was actually Victoria's cosmetology school tuition. He'd been funding her entire life with my money while telling me she was materialistic. I found their text messages on his iPad that he'd forgotten was synced. Victoria called him baby and thanked him for taking care of her. She sent heart emojis and pictures of her new clothes and nails paid for with my money. She complained when the payments were late and threatened to tell me everything if he didn't send more. She knew about me the whole time and called me the stupid ATM girlfriend. Lucas promised her he'd leave me once she was back on her feet, but needed more time to save, which meant steal from me. The messages showed they met up every week at her apartment that my money was paying for. Those were his mysterious stomach problems that required immediate departure. They were still sleeping together and laughing about how clueless I was. Victoria actually sent him lingerie photos asking if he wanted her to wear the red or black that my money bought. That's when I got creative. I called Victoria's landlord pretending to be her employer, confirming her employment for renewal. I said Victoria had been terminated for theft and wouldn't be able to verify income anymore. The landlord thanked me and said he'd been suspicious since she paid in random cash amounts. Then I called the cosmetology school and said I was Victoria's bank flagging fraudulent tuition payments from stolen accounts. They froze her enrollment pending investigation. I contacted the yoga studio about membership fees being paid with stolen funds, and they canceled her access. Next, I went to Lucas's work. I talked to his manager Brad about missing inventory that coincidentally matched items Lucas had access to. I mentioned I'd noticed sporting equipment in Victoria's apartment photos that looked familiar. Brad pulled the security footage and found Lucas loading boxes into his car after hours. Turns out he'd been stealing from work too and selling it to fund Victoria's lifestyle on top of stealing from me. Brad called the police and Lucas was arrested at work in front of all his coworkers. Victoria showed up at my apartment screaming that I'd ruined her life and demanded that I fund her because Lucas is now in jail. I grabbed my phone and pressed it against the door. Victoria kept screaming, but I dialed 911 anyway. The operator answered and I started talking over Victoria's yelling. I gave my address and apartment number while Victoria pounded on the door. She was screaming that Lucas was in jail because of me and I owed her money now. I told the operator someone was threatening me at my door and refusing to leave. Victoria must have heard me because suddenly the screaming stopped. I heard her footsteps running down the hallway. The operator asked if I was safe and I said yes. She left. The operator said police were on the way and to stay inside with the door locked. 20 minutes later, 2 officers knocked on my door. I checked the peephole first, then let them in. They asked what happened and I explained everything. Victoria showed up demanding money and threatening me after her boyfriend got arrested for stealing from me. One officer wrote everything down while the other one looked around my apartment like he was making sure Victoria wasn't hiding somewhere. The first officer said his name was Detective Keith Robbins and he was already familiar with my case from the reports about Lucas. He asked if Victoria made any specific threats and I told him she said I ruined her life and demanded I give her money. Detective Robbins said Victoria could face charges for harassment and demanding money. He told me to document every time she contacts me and save everything. He gave me his card and said to call immediately if she comes back. The officers left and I locked the door behind them. I sat on my couch shaking. Everything felt too big and scary. I picked up my phone and called Melanie from work. She answered right away and I started crying when I tried to explain. She told me to stop talking and said she was coming over. 40 minutes later, she knocked on my door with 2 bottles of wine and Chinese food. She came in and hugged me without saying anything. We sat on the couch and I told her the whole story from the beginning. Finding the transfers, discovering Victoria, calling all those places, Lucas getting arrested, Victoria showing up. Melanie listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she poured us both wine and said I was the bravest person she knew. She said most people would have just cried and let Lucas get away with it. She stayed until midnight making sure I was okay. The next morning, I called my bank as soon as they opened. I explained that someone stole money from my account by setting up transfers without my permission. The representative asked a bunch of questions about when I noticed and who did it. I told her my boyfriend admitted to setting up the transfers while I was asleep. She said I needed to file a formal fraud claim, and it would take a few weeks to investigate. She asked if I had any proof, and I said Lucas admitted it, and the police arrested him. The representative said that was good because it made my case stronger. She said the bank would investigate and likely return my money since the transfers were unauthorized. She warned me it wouldn't be instant and to be patient. I thanked her and hung up feeling a tiny bit better about getting my money back. I texted Ryan about everything that happened. I'd been avoiding telling him because I knew he'd be upset. My phone rang 2 minutes later. Ryan was yelling before I even said hello. He asked why I didn't tell him sooner and said he would have helped. I explained I was embarrassed and didn't know what to do. Ryan calmed down and said he was a paralegal and could research options for me. He said I could file a civil suit against Lucas and Victoria to recover my money plus damages. He started talking about legal terms I didn't understand, but it sounded like I had options beyond just the criminal case. He said he'd make some calls and figure out the best approach. I felt grateful to have family who actually cared about helping instead of judging me for being stupid. My phone rang again that afternoon from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Lucas calling from jail. He was crying immediately and begging me to listen. He said he made a terrible mistake and he was so sorry. He asked me to drop the charges and said he'd pay back every penny. I told him he had 6 months to pay me back and he chose to steal instead. He kept crying and saying Victoria manipulated him and he loved me. I said he made his choices and now I was making mine. I hung up and blocked the number. My hands were shaking, but I felt good about standing up for myself. Brad called me later that day. He said after reviewing the security footage they found way more theft than they expected. Lucas had been stealing merchandise for months and they calculated over $15,000 worth of missing items. Brad thanked me for the tip about checking the footage. He said without my information they never would have caught Lucas. The company was pressing full charges and Lucas would be facing serious time. Brad apologized for not noticing sooner and said he felt terrible I got caught up in this. I told him it wasn't his fault, and I appreciated him taking action. He said if I needed anything to call him anytime. Victoria started texting me that night. The first message said I destroyed an innocent person's life. The second message said she'd make sure everyone knew what a terrible person I was. The third message begged me to help her because she had nowhere to go. The messages kept coming every few minutes, switching between threats and begging. She said I was vindictive and cruel for ruining Lucas. She said she'd tell everyone I was jealous and crazy. She said she'd post about me online so everyone would know. Then she'd switch to begging and saying she had no money for rent. I didn't respond to any of them. I just let them pile up on my phone. I screenshotted every single text Victoria sent. There were 37 messages by the time she stopped. I forwarded all of them to Detective Robbins with a message explaining Victoria was harassing me. He called me back within an hour. He said the texts were perfect evidence and made the harassment case much stronger. He told me to keep my phone on and let Victoria keep texting if she wanted. He said the more evidence we had of her behavior, the better. He warned me not to respond because that could complicate things legally. I promised I wouldn't reply no matter what she said. Ryan called me the next day saying he found a lawyer for me. The lawyer's name was Nicholas Carver and he handled civil fraud cases. Ryan already sent him all the information about what happened. Nicholas wanted to meet with me to review everything and discuss options. Ryan said Nicholas was really good and thought I had an excellent case. I could sue both Lucas and Victoria for the stolen money plus damages for emotional distress and time spent dealing with this mess. Nicholas could get me more than just the $8,000 back. I made an appointment to meet Nicholas the following week. For the first time since this started, I felt like maybe everything would actually work out. 2 days after my meeting with Nicholas, someone knocked on my apartment door around 8 in the morning. I looked through the peephole and saw an older couple standing in the hallway looking nervous and uncomfortable. The woman had Lucas's eyes and the man had his nose. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. The woman started talking immediately about how they were Lucas's parents and they needed to speak with me about their son. She said Lucas made a terrible mistake, but he didn't deserve to have his entire future destroyed over one bad decision. The man jumped in saying Lucas was a good kid who got confused about his feelings for his ex and handled it wrong. They wanted me to understand that Lucas loved me and never meant to hurt me. I told them through the gap in the door that their son didn't make one mistake. He made hundreds of deliberate choices over 6 months to steal from me while lying to my face every single day. I said he set up electronic transfers while I slept and funded his ex's entire lifestyle with my money. The woman started crying and said everyone deserves a second chance and Lucas was so sorry. I told them Lucas was sorry he got caught. not sorry for what he did. The man said I was being vindictive and cruel by pressing charges when I could just let it go. I said their son was a thief and a liar, and I was closing the door now. The woman tried to stick her foot in the doorway, but I told her I'd call the police if she didn't leave immediately. They finally walked away, and I heard the woman crying in the hallway about how I ruined her baby's life. That same afternoon, I got a message request on social media from someone named Chloe. The message said she was Victoria's roommate and she needed to talk to me about what happened. She said she had no idea Victoria was doing any of this, and she felt sick when the police told her the truth. Chloe wrote that Victoria had been lying to everyone, including her, and she wanted to help make things right. She offered to testify about Victoria's spending habits and the things Victoria said about me behind my back. I was suspicious at first because this could be some trick Victoria set up. I looked at Chloe's profile and saw pictures going back years showing her at college and with friends and at her job. She looked real and normal, not like someone who would be involved in Victoria's schemes. I messaged back asking what kind of information she had. Chloe responded within minutes, saying she had receipts and photos and text messages showing everything Victoria spent money on. She said Victoria bragged constantly about having someone funding her lifestyle and called him her sugar daddy. Chloe wrote that Victoria laughed about how stupid and gullible the girlfriend was for not figuring it out. I felt my stomach turn reading that, but I agreed to meet Chloe the next day at a coffee shop near my work. I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early and sat in the back corner where I could see the door. Chloe walked in right on time carrying a large folder and looking around nervously. She was shorter than I expected with curly red hair and glasses. She spotted me and walked over apologizing for everything before she even sat down. She put the folder on the table and started pulling out receipts and printed photos. There were receipts from expensive clothing stores showing purchases of $200 and $300 at a time. There were salon receipts for nails and hair that cost over $100 each visit. There were restaurant receipts showing Victoria eating at fancy places and ordering expensive wine. Chloe had photos from Victoria's social media showing new designer purses and shoes and jewelry. She explained that Victoria posted all this stuff online bragging about her lifestyle while claiming to be broke. Chloe showed me text messages where Victoria complained about her sugar daddy being slow with payments. In one message, Victoria called me the stupid ATM girlfriend and said I deserved to be used because I was too dumb to notice. Another message showed Victoria laughing about how she'd never have to work as long as she kept Lucas wrapped around her finger. Chloe said she confronted Victoria after the police came, and Victoria admitted everything, but said it wasn't her fault, because Lucas offered the money. I asked Chloe why she was helping me, and she said because what Victoria did was wrong, and she couldn't live with herself if she stayed silent. She said she was moving out at the end of the month because she couldn't be around someone that terrible anymore. 3 days later, I got a call from someone at the cosmetology school asking about my fraud report. The woman on the phone said they received my complaint about fraudulent tuition payments and needed more information. I explained that my boyfriend had stolen money from my account and used it to pay his ex-girlfriend's tuition without my knowledge or permission. The woman asked if I had proof of the unauthorized transfers. I told her I had bank statements showing the money leaving my account and going to Victoria's account on the exact dates the tuition payments were made. She asked me to email copies of those statements along with my police report number. I sent everything over within an hour. The woman called me back the next morning and said their investigation confirmed my money had paid Victoria's tuition for the past 2 semesters. She thanked me for bringing this to their attention and said they were cooperating fully with the police investigation. She explained that Victoria's enrollment was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case, and any tuition paid with stolen funds would need to be returned or verified through legitimate sources. Detective Robbins called me 4 days after Lucas's arrest. He said the district attorney decided to charge Lucas with felony theft from his employer for stealing over $15,000 worth of merchandise. Lucas was also being charged with misdemeanor fraud for setting up the unauthorized transfers from my account. Detective Robbins explained the felony charge was more serious and carried potential jail time, while the misdemeanor might result in probation. He said Lucas's public defender would probably try to negotiate a plea deal to avoid trial. The detective told me the DA's office would contact me about giving a victim impact statement if the case went to sentencing. He said my cooperation and documentation made their job much easier, and the case against Lucas was very strong. I asked what would happen to Victoria, and he said she was charged separately with receiving stolen property since she knew the money was stolen. He explained her charges were less serious than Lucas's, but she could still face probation and restitution. That night, I woke up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing and my chest tight. I couldn't breathe right and my hands were shaking. I kept thinking about Lucas using my laptop while I slept to set up those transfers. I thought about him lying next to me in bed planning how to steal more money. I remembered all the times he kissed me and told me he loved me while secretly funding Victoria's life. My mind kept replaying every conversation where he talked about saving for school, when really he was spending my money on his ex. I felt stupid and used and angry all at the same time. The panic attack lasted almost 20 minutes before I could breathe normally again. I had another one 2 days later while I was at work. Melanie found me in the bathroom trying to calm down, and she sat with me until I could function again. She said I needed to talk to someone professional about this because what Lucas did was traumatic. Melanie gave me her therapist's card and made me promise to call. The therapist's name was Autumn Francis, and Melanie said she was really good at helping people process betrayal and trust issues. I made an appointment for the following week because the panic attacks were getting worse and I couldn't keep living like this. Chloe texted me 5 days after our coffee shop meeting. She said Victoria got evicted from their apartment because the landlord found out she couldn't verify any legitimate income. Victoria tried to show him cash, but he said that wasn't good enough after my call about her being fired for theft. Chloe wrote that Victoria packed her stuff and moved into her car. She sent me a photo of Victoria's car parked behind a grocery store with clothes and boxes visible in the back seat. Chloe said Victoria was still blaming me for everything, and refused to accept that her own choices caused this situation. Victoria apparently told Chloe that I was jealous and vindictive, and destroyed her life on purpose. Chloe said she tried to explain to Victoria that stealing money has consequences, but Victoria just screamed at her. The text ended with Chloe saying she felt bad that Victoria was homeless, but also believed Victoria needed to face reality about what she did. My first appointment with Autumn was on a Tuesday afternoon. Her office was in a small building near the hospital with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Autumn was maybe 50 years old with kind eyes and a calm voice. She asked me to tell her what brought me in, and I explained everything about Lucas and Victoria and the stolen money. I told her about the panic attacks and the feeling of being stupid for not seeing the signs. Autumn listened without interrupting, and then she said something that made me cry. She said my generosity wasn't the problem, and I shouldn't feel ashamed for being a kind person. She explained that Lucas exploited my trust, and that was his failing, not mine. She said people who manipulate others are very good at hiding their true intentions, and I had no reason to suspect someone I loved was stealing from me. Autumn validated my anger and told me I had every right to pursue justice without feeling guilty. She said holding people accountable for their actions wasn't vindictive. It was healthy and necessary. We talked for the full hour about trust and boundaries and how to process betrayal without letting it poison my ability to connect with people in the future. The bank called me 6 days later with news about their investigation. The representative said they determined the transfers were definitely unauthorized because Lucas set them up without my knowledge while I was asleep. She explained the bank would restore $6,000 to my account immediately as part of their fraud protection policy. The remaining $2,000 was pending recovery from Lucas's accounts or assets. She said they filed their own police report and would cooperate with the criminal investigation. The representative apologized for the delay in catching the suspicious activity and said they implemented additional security measures on my account. She asked if I wanted to set up alerts for any transfers over $50, and I said yes immediately. The $6,000 appeared in my account the next morning, and seeing that money back felt like a small victory. It wasn't everything, but it was substantial, and it proved I was right to report the theft. Nicholas called me 8 days after our initial meeting. He said Lucas's public defender reached out about a possible settlement to avoid a civil suit. Lucas's parents were offering to pay back $4,000 if I agreed to drop any plans for additional legal action. Nicholas told me this was way too low considering the total damages. He explained I could sue for the full $8,000 plus additional damages for emotional distress and the time I spent dealing with this mess. Nicholas said Lucas's parents were probably hoping I'd take the quick money and go away. He advised me to reject the offer and counter with a higher amount. Nicholas said he'd draft a response demanding the full $8,000 plus $3,000 in damages. He explained that threatening to add Victoria to the civil suit would put more pressure on Lucas's family to settle properly. I told Nicholas to do whatever he thought was best because I trusted his judgment, and I was tired of people trying to take advantage of me. Nicholas sent his counteroffer to Lucas's parents 3 days later. He demanded the full $8,000 plus $3,000 in damages for emotional distress and the time I spent dealing with this nightmare. The letter explained that I had every right to pursue both Lucas and Victoria in civil court for the full amount of my losses, plus additional compensation. Nicholas made it clear that refusing this settlement meant I would add Victoria to the lawsuit, which would drag out the process and cost their family even more in legal fees. He gave them 1 week to respond before we filed the paperwork. I felt good about standing firm on what I deserved instead of accepting their lowball offer just to make things easier on them. Victoria started posting on social media 2 days after Nicholas sent the counteroffer. She wrote long posts about being the victim of a vindictive ex-girlfriend who destroyed her life out of pure jealousy. She claimed I was obsessed with ruining her because I couldn't accept that Lucas loved her more than me. She said I fabricated evidence and manipulated everyone into believing lies about her. She posted pictures of herself looking sad and defeated with captions about surviving abuse from toxic people. She tagged mutual friends and acquaintances trying to get sympathy and support. Most people ignored her posts, but a few left comments asking for her side of the story. Chloe screenshot everything and sent it to me within hours. She said this was perfect evidence of Victoria's complete lack of accountability and total refusal to admit what she did. Chloe told me to save everything because it showed Victoria's mindset and her attempts to manipulate public opinion. I forwarded all the screenshots to Nicholas and Detective Robbins, so they had documentation of her continued harassment. Lucas's former coworkers started reaching out to me privately over the next week. 3 different people sent me messages on social media saying they always thought something was off about him. One guy named Tyler said Lucas used to brag about having a girlfriend who paid for everything and never complained. Tyler said Lucas talked about me like I was stupid for being so generous and trusting. He said Lucas would laugh about getting free rent and food while saving his own money for other things. Hearing that made my stomach turn because it meant Lucas was mocking me to his coworkers the whole time we were together. Another coworker said Lucas was always secretive about his phone and would leave the break room whenever he got certain calls. She said everyone suspected he was cheating, but nobody wanted to get involved in his personal business. A third person said Lucas sold sporting equipment to him at cheap prices, claiming it was damaged merchandise from the store. He felt terrible when he found out Lucas was actually stealing inventory and wanted me to know he had no idea. I thanked each person for reaching out, even though their messages made me feel worse about how blind I had been. Detective Robbins called me on a Tuesday morning with an update about Victoria's charges. He said the prosecutor was moving forward with charging her for receiving stolen property and harassment. He explained that my documentation of her threatening texts made the harassment charge easy to prove. The texts where she demanded money and called me names showed a clear pattern of threatening behavior. Detective Robbins said Victoria's social media posts actually helped their case because they demonstrated her ongoing attempts to harass and defame me. He told me Victoria would be arraigned within 2 weeks and would likely try to claim she didn't know the money was stolen. He said that defense wouldn't work given all the text messages between her and Lucas discussing the transfers from my account. I asked if she might go to jail, and he said it depended on her criminal history and whether she took a plea deal. He thought she would probably get probation and restitution if she had a clean record. Lucas took a plea deal 3 weeks after his arrest. The prosecutor called Nicholas to let him know Lucas pleaded guilty to felony theft from his employer. The deal included 6 months in county jail, 3 years probation, and restitution of $15,000 to the sporting goods store. The prosecutor explained that my case would be handled separately through the civil system since it involved different legal issues. She said Lucas's guilty plea would help my civil case because it established his pattern of theft and deception. Nicholas told me this was good news because it meant Lucas couldn't claim innocence or try to fight the evidence anymore. He said the criminal conviction made our civil suit much stronger and would pressure Lucas's parents to settle quickly. I felt relieved that Lucas was facing real consequences, even though 6 months seemed short for everything he did. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after Lucas took the plea deal. Nicholas said I had the right to attend and give a victim impact statement if I wanted to. I decided to go because I wanted Lucas to hear directly from me about the damage he caused. I wrote my statement over several days, trying to find the right words to explain the betrayal and financial harm. The morning of the hearing, I drove to the courthouse with Melanie for moral support. The courtroom was small and depressing with fluorescent lights and worn furniture. Lucas sat at a table with his public defender wearing an orange jumpsuit and looking thinner than I remembered. His parents sat in the gallery behind him and glared at me when I walked in. The judge called me up to read my statement, and I walked to the front on shaky legs. I talked about trusting Lucas completely and supporting him financially because I thought we were building a future together. I explained how he systematically stole from me for 6 months while lying about his intentions and mocking me behind my back. I described the panic attacks and therapy sessions and the violation of having someone I loved steal from me while I slept. Lucas cried the whole time I spoke and kept wiping his eyes with his sleeve. When I finished, the judge asked if Lucas wanted to respond. Lucas stood up and apologized through tears, saying he never meant to hurt me, and he was ashamed of what he did. But I noticed he never actually took full responsibility or explained why he did it. He just kept saying he was sorry, and he made mistakes without admitting he deliberately chose to steal from me and fund Victoria's life. The judge sentenced him to the agreed-upon 6 months and told him he was lucky to avoid more serious charges. I left the courtroom feeling empty instead of satisfied. Lucas's parents called Nicholas the day after the sentencing hearing. They agreed to pay the full $11,000 settlement to avoid their son facing additional civil litigation. Nicholas said they finally realized fighting would cost them more in legal fees than just paying what I was owed. He drafted a settlement agreement that required payment within 30 days and included language preventing Lucas from ever contacting me again. The agreement also stated that paying the settlement was not an admission of liability, but rather a resolution to avoid further legal action. Nicholas got both parents to sign the document and had it notarized, so it was legally binding. He told me to expect a cashier's check in the mail within a month and to contact him immediately if they tried to back out. I felt victorious that I was getting my money back plus damages, even though no amount of money could undo the betrayal. Victoria's court date was set for 2 months out, according to the prosecutor's office. They sent me a letter explaining the charges and the court schedule. The prosecutor called me a week later to discuss Victoria's case. She said Victoria was refusing to take a plea deal and wanted to go to trial. Victoria apparently believed she could convince a jury that she didn't know the money was stolen. The prosecutor said this was a terrible strategy given all the evidence, but some defendants refused to accept reality. She explained that going to trial meant I would have to testify about the theft and the text messages. I said I was willing to do whatever was necessary to make sure Victoria faced consequences. The prosecutor seemed confident about winning at trial, but warned me that juries could be unpredictable. Chloe reached out to the prosecutor and offered to testify against Victoria. She provided the prosecutor with text messages from Victoria that proved Victoria knew exactly where the money came from. The messages included Victoria calling me an idiot and laughing about the situation with her friends. Chloe said Victoria used to brag about having Lucas wrapped around her finger and mocked him for stealing from his stupid girlfriend. The prosecutor told me Chloe's testimony would be devastating for Victoria's defense because it came from her own roommate and friend. She said having an insider witness made the case nearly impossible for Victoria to win. I thanked Chloe for being brave enough to come forward, even though it meant losing her friendship with Victoria. Chloe said she couldn't stay quiet when she knew Victoria was lying and trying to play victim. I started focusing on rebuilding my savings and my sense of security now that the legal process was moving forward. Melanie came over one Saturday and helped me change all my passwords and set up account alerts. She showed me how to enable 2-factor authentication on everything and how to check my credit report for suspicious activity. We went through my bank accounts and investment accounts, updating security settings and making sure nobody else had access. Melanie helped me create a budget that included rebuilding my emergency fund and setting aside money for future legal fees if needed. She also talked to me about creating better financial boundaries for any future relationships. She said being generous was wonderful, but I needed to protect myself from people who might take advantage. We made a list of red flags to watch for, like partners who always have money problems or who get defensive about finances. Melanie said the goal wasn't to become cynical, but to be smarter about who I trusted with my money and my heart. I started seeing Autumn twice a week instead of once because I needed help understanding why I'd ignored so many warning signs with Lucas. She asked me to list the red flags I'd noticed and dismissed, and writing them down made me feel sick. The disappearing for hours, the defensive behavior about his phone, the mysterious stomach problems that always required him to leave suddenly. I'd explained away every single one because I wanted to believe Lucas was good and honest. Autumn told me this pattern was common in people who valued seeing the best in others, but she helped me understand there was a difference between being kind and being naive. She said healthy relationships required both trust and awareness, that I could be generous without ignoring obvious problems. We worked on recognizing manipulation tactics and setting boundaries that protected me without making me cynical about everyone. She gave me homework to practice noticing when someone's words didn't match their actions and to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. The work was hard because it meant accepting that my desire to help people had been used against me. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the yoga studio manager asking if I was still in contact with Victoria. He said a woman matching her description had tried to join using the name Sarah Mitchell and a different credit card. The front desk staff recognized her from the photos I'd provided when I reported the fraud, and they refused her membership. I thanked him for calling and confirmed that Victoria was facing criminal charges for receiving stolen property. He said they'd keep her information on file and would contact police if she tried again. The call reminded me that Victoria was still out there trying to rebuild the life my money had funded, just under a different name. She hadn't learned anything from getting caught and was still trying to scam her way through life. 3 days after that, an envelope arrived with Lucas's parents' return address. Inside was a letter from Lucas written on lined notebook paper with prison regulations printed at the top. I held it for maybe 30 seconds before walking to my kitchen trash can and dropping it in without reading a single word. Nicholas had advised me during our last meeting that I had zero obligation to engage with Lucas's attempts at getting closure or forgiveness. He said people like Lucas often wrote letters trying to make themselves feel better about what they'd done, and reading them would only drag me back into his manipulation. I took a photo of the unopened envelope in the trash and texted it to Melanie with the caption, "Nope." She responded with 3 celebration emojis and told me she was proud of me for protecting my peace. The prosecutor called me 4 weeks before Victoria's trial date to schedule a meeting for testimony preparation. Her office was in the courthouse building, small and cluttered with case files stacked everywhere. She spent 2 hours going through the bank records, the text messages between Lucas and Victoria, and Chloe's witness statement. She said Victoria's decision to go to trial instead of taking a plea deal was foolish given the evidence, but it meant I'd need to testify about discovering the theft and the impact it had on my life. She seemed confident about winning the case, especially with Chloe's testimony proving Victoria knew exactly where the money came from. The prosecutor showed me the text where Victoria called me an idiot and bragged to her friends about manipulating Lucas. She explained that these messages destroyed any claim Victoria might make about being an innocent victim who thought Lucas was just generous. I requested a personal day from work to attend Victoria's trial. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with old wooden benches and fluorescent lights that made everything look washed out and depressing. Victoria sat at the defense table wearing a conservative blue dress that was probably borrowed, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger and more innocent. She glared at me the entire time I sat in the gallery waiting to be called, her eyes filled with pure hatred like I was the villain who'd ruined her life instead of the person she'd stolen from and mocked. Her lawyer looked tired and unprepared, shuffling through papers and whispering urgently to Victoria between proceedings. The prosecutor looked calm and organized with everything in labeled folders, ready to present the case that would prove Victoria's guilt. Chloe testified first, and her words were devastating for Victoria's defense. She described in detail how Victoria used to brag about having Lucas wrapped around her finger, how she'd laugh about him stealing from his stupid girlfriend to pay for her lifestyle. Chloe provided specific examples of conversations where Victoria complained about the payments being late and threatened to expose the whole scheme if Lucas didn't send more money. She testified that Victoria knew I existed, knew the money was mine, and actively mocked me for being too trusting and generous. Victoria's lawyer tried to discredit Chloe by suggesting she was jealous or had a grudge, but Chloe remained calm and stuck to the facts. She'd brought her own copies of text messages as backup, and the prosecutor entered them as evidence showing Victoria's full awareness and participation. The bank records came next, displayed on a screen for the jury to see. The prosecutor walked through each transfer from my account to Victoria's, showing the pattern that started small and grew larger over 6 months. She connected each deposit to Victoria's spending on clothes, nails, dining out, and yoga classes, proving Victoria was living entirely on stolen money. The timeline showed Victoria's rent payments, her cosmetology school tuition, even her grocery purchases all lined up with the transfers from my account. Victoria's lawyer had no effective counter-argument because the records were clear and undeniable. He tried to suggest Victoria didn't know the source of the money, but the prosecutor immediately showed the text messages where Victoria demanded payments and threatened Lucas. Victoria took the stand and tried to claim she thought Lucas was wealthy and giving her gifts out of love. She said she had no idea he was stealing from anyone and that she believed he had money from his job and investments. The prosecutor destroyed the story in minutes by showing Victoria's own texts demanding payments when they were late and threatening to tell me everything if Lucas didn't send more. She read aloud the messages where Victoria called me the stupid ATM girlfriend and laughed about how clueless I was. Victoria tried to claim those messages were jokes taken out of context, but the prosecutor showed message after message proving Victoria's full knowledge and active participation in the scheme. Victoria's face turned red as her lies fell apart on the stand, and even her own lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. The jury left to deliberate and came back in less than 2 hours with a guilty verdict on receiving stolen property. Victoria's face went pale as the verdict was read, and she grabbed her lawyer's arm like she might faint. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks out and revoked Victoria's bail since she'd tried to join the yoga studio under a false name. The prosecutor told me afterward that Victoria would likely get probation and restitution instead of jail time since this was her first conviction, but at least there would be consequences. I watched the bailiff lead Victoria away in handcuffs, and she shot me one last look of pure hatred before disappearing through the door. I felt exhausted relief after the verdict, but not the triumphant satisfaction I'd expected when I imagined this moment. Winning didn't erase what Lucas and Victoria had done, or magically heal the wounds their betrayal had caused. I told Autumn about this feeling in our next session, and she helped me understand that justice and healing were separate processes. She said the legal system could hold people accountable, but it couldn't undo the emotional damage or restore the trust that had been broken. The verdict meant Victoria would face consequences, but it didn't mean I was suddenly okay, or that everything was fixed. Autumn reminded me that healing would take time and work, and that expecting the trial outcome to solve everything was unrealistic. 2 weeks after the trial ended, Nicholas called to tell me Lucas's parents' settlement check had cleared. I logged into my bank account and stared at the $11,000 deposit that appeared overnight. It wasn't the full amount I'd lost, but it was substantial enough to make me feel like I'd won something real. Nicholas had handled all the communication with Lucas's family, so I never had to speak to them again after they showed up at my apartment trying to defend their thief son. The money sat there in my account looking almost fake after months of watching my savings drain away. I transferred most of it to a high-yield savings account that required my fingerprint to access because I wasn't taking any chances with my money ever again. Victoria's sentencing hearing happened on a cold morning 3 weeks after her conviction. I took another personal day from work and sat in the same depressing courtroom watching her stand before the judge in clothes that looked cheap compared to the designer outfits my money used to buy her. The judge sentenced her to 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay restitution of $8,000 to me. Victoria's face went pale when the judge read the restitution amount, and her lawyer whispered something in her ear that made her nod quickly. The judge looked at Victoria over his glasses and told her she was lucky to avoid jail time given the evidence of her knowing participation in the theft. Victoria mumbled something that might have been thank you, but sounded more like she was choking. I watched her sign paperwork with shaking hands and wondered if she finally understood that actions had real consequences. Nicholas met me outside the courtroom after the sentencing and explained the reality of the restitution order. Victoria would have to make monthly payments, but collecting from someone with no job and no assets would be extremely difficult. He said I might get $50 or $100 a month if I was lucky, and that many restitution orders go unpaid for years or forever. I accepted this information without much emotion, because I'd already gotten most of my money back from Lucas's parents. If Victoria never paid me a single dollar, it wouldn't destroy my life the way her and Lucas had tried to. The satisfaction came from knowing she'd have this debt hanging over her head, and any violation of her probation could send her to jail. 3 months after I first discovered the theft, I noticed I was sleeping through the night without waking up in a panic. The constant anxiety that had lived in my chest since finding those bank transfers had faded to something manageable. I still had bad days where I'd see something that reminded me of Lucas and feel angry all over again. But those days were getting less frequent. Autumn and I worked through my tendency to replay the betrayal in my mind and look for signs I should have caught earlier. She helped me understand that Lucas was skilled at deception, and that being trusting wasn't the same as being stupid. Our therapy sessions moved from crisis management to actual healing, and I started to believe I might come out of this experience stronger instead of permanently damaged. Melanie surprised me one Friday by announcing we were taking a weekend trip to the beach. She'd booked a small hotel room overlooking the ocean and refused to let me pay for anything, because this was her treat. We drove 3 hours with the windows down and music playing loud enough to drown out my thoughts. The ocean looked huge and peaceful and completely indifferent to my problems, which felt oddly comforting. We spent 2 days eating seafood, walking on the beach, and talking about everything except Lucas and Victoria. On our last night there, Melanie told me she was proud of how I'd handled everything with strength and strategy instead of falling apart like she would have. I started to argue, but she cut me off and said I'd taken control of a terrible situation and made sure both of them faced real consequences. Hearing someone I respected say they were proud of me made something tight in my chest finally loosen. Ryan called every week to check on me even though he was busy with his own life and job. He'd ask specific questions about my finances and my emotional state instead of generic, "How are you doing?" questions that people ask without really wanting to know. Having family support throughout this nightmare made an enormous difference in my ability to cope with everything. Ryan never made me feel weak or stupid for missing the signs of Lucas's theft. He treated me like someone dealing with a crime that happened to them, not someone who'd made dumb choices. When I thanked him for being there, he said family shows up when things get hard, and that's just what you do for people you love. My boss called me into her office one Tuesday morning and I felt my stomach drop thinking something was wrong. Instead, she told me I was getting a small promotion with a raise because I'd shown impressive work quality during what she knew was a difficult personal situation. She didn't know all the details, but she'd noticed I'd taken some personal days and seemed stressed, yet my work never suffered. The promotion came with a $2 per hour raise, which didn't sound like much but added up to over $4,000 extra per year. The financial boost would help me rebuild my emergency fund faster, and felt like proof that my life was actually moving forward, instead of staying stuck in the mess Lucas created. Chloe and I started meeting for coffee every few weeks after bonding over the whole Victoria situation. She'd moved out of Victoria's apartment right before the eviction and found a studio closer to her job. Chloe said she learned important lessons about choosing better roommates and friends after watching Victoria's complete lack of accountability. She felt guilty for not realizing sooner that Victoria was spending stolen money, but I reminded her that Victoria was good at hiding her true nature. We became unlikely friends who understood each other's experiences with Victoria's manipulation. Chloe was funny and honest in a way that made me trust her, and having a friend who'd witnessed Victoria's behavior from the inside validated my own reactions to everything. I went on a few casual dates after Melanie convinced me I should at least try meeting new people. The dates were fine, but nothing special, and I realized I wasn't ready for anything serious yet. Autumn said it was healthy that I wasn't rushing into a new relationship before I'd fully processed the last one. She explained that many people who experience betrayal either shut down completely or jump into something new to avoid dealing with their feelings. Taking time to heal and figure out what I actually wanted showed emotional maturity. I appreciated her saying this because part of me worried I was being too cautious, or letting Lucas's betrayal make me afraid of ever trusting anyone again. 4 months after everything started, Victoria violated her probation by contacting me through a fake social media account. The profile used a random woman's photo and a generic name, but the message calling me names and blaming me for ruining her life was obviously from Victoria. She said I was a vindictive person who couldn't handle that Lucas loved someone else, and that karma would come for me eventually. I screenshot the message immediately, and reported it to her probation officer through the contact information Nicholas had given me. The probation officer called me back within an hour, and said this was a serious violation that could result in jail time. She warned Victoria that any further contact with me would mean immediate consequences and possibly revocation of her probation. Victoria's inability to leave me alone even after facing criminal charges showed she still hadn't learned anything about taking responsibility for her own choices. Ryan called me 2 weeks later saying he'd heard through some mutual connections that Lucas got released from jail early. 4 months instead of 6 because of good behavior, which made me laugh since Lucas clearly hadn't learned what actual good behavior meant. Ryan said Lucas moved back in with his parents in another state and was working at a retail store there. Part of me wanted to feel satisfied knowing Lucas was living with his parents at 30 years old after everything he'd done, but mostly I just felt relieved he was far away from me. The distance meant I wouldn't accidentally run into him at the grocery store or see him around town, and that peace of mind was worth more than any satisfaction from knowing he was struggling. The first restitution payment from Victoria arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon. I opened the envelope and found a money order for $50 with no note or explanation. $50 when she owed me $8,000 felt like a joke, like she was mocking me even while supposedly paying me back. I called Nicholas immediately and asked if this was really how it was going to go. He sighed and said yes. Unfortunately, the court only required her to make monthly payments of whatever she could afford, and Victoria had apparently convinced them that $50 was all she could manage. Nicholas explained that at this rate it would take over 13 years for me to get the full amount back, and that was assuming Victoria actually kept making payments instead of disappearing or claiming she couldn't afford even $50 anymore. He said many restitution cases go unpaid for years or decades because the court system has limited enforcement power once someone is on probation. I thanked him for being honest and deposited the $50, deciding I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for the rest. 6 months had passed since I first discovered Lucas's betrayal, and my life looked completely different now. I'd recovered most of my money between the bank's fraud recovery, Lucas's parents' settlement, and even Victoria's tiny payments. My savings account was rebuilding steadily, and I'd gotten better about monitoring my accounts and setting up alerts for any unusual activity. Both Lucas and Victoria had faced real consequences for what they did, even if those consequences weren't as severe as I thought they deserved. Lucas spent time in jail and now lived with his parents in another state with a criminal record that would follow him forever. Victoria had a criminal record too, probation requirements, and her life fell apart when I pulled the threads holding it together. More importantly, I was building a healthier life for myself with better boundaries and clearer understanding of what I would and wouldn't accept from people. The betrayal still hurt when I thought about it too much, but the sharp pain had faded into something duller that I could live with. I met with Autumn for what we both knew might be our last regular weekly session. She asked how I was feeling about everything, and I told her honestly that I felt stronger than I had in years. Autumn smiled and said she'd been thinking the same thing, that I'd made incredible progress in processing the betrayal without letting it destroy my ability to trust anyone. She suggested we transition to monthly check-ins instead of weekly sessions, since I was clearly in a much better place emotionally. I agreed and thanked her for helping me through the worst period of my life. Autumn said she was impressed with my ability to set boundaries while remaining open to future relationships, which she explained was difficult for many people who experience betrayal. She said some people shut down completely and never trust again, while others ignore what happened and repeat the same patterns. I was doing neither, which showed real emotional growth and self-awareness. We scheduled our first monthly check-in for 4 weeks out, and I left her office feeling proud of how far I'd come. The financial literacy program I'd been reading about online was looking for volunteers to help teach workshops. The program focused specifically on helping people recognize financial abuse in relationships, which felt perfect for me given everything I'd been through. I filled out the volunteer application and explained my personal experience with financial betrayal and manipulation. The program coordinator called me 2 days later and said my story was exactly the kind of real-world experience that could help other people recognize warning signs before they lost thousands of dollars. She invited me to attend a training session the following weekend to learn how to facilitate workshops and share my story effectively. Turning my painful experience into something that could help others felt meaningful in a way I hadn't expected. Instead of just being the woman who got scammed by her boyfriend, I could be someone who used that experience to protect other people from the same thing. Melanie and I met for lunch at our usual spot, and she looked at me across the table with this expression I couldn't quite read. She finally said I seemed like myself again, but stronger and wiser, like I'd gone through something terrible and come out better on the other side. I thought about that for a minute and realized she was right. I was still generous and kind, still wanted to help people and see the best in them, but I wasn't naive anymore about people's capacity for deception and manipulation. I knew now that some people would take advantage of kindness without any guilt or remorse, and that protecting myself didn't make me selfish or cold. Melanie reached across the table and squeezed my hand, telling me she was proud of me for not letting Lucas's betrayal turn me into someone bitter and closed off. She said she'd worried I might never trust anyone again, or become suspicious of everyone's motives, but instead I'd found a healthy balance between being open and being careful. An envelope arrived in my mailbox with Lucas's parents' return address, and my first instinct was to throw it away without opening it. But curiosity won, and I opened it to find a brief handwritten letter from his mother. She wrote that she and her husband wanted to apologize for not raising their son better, for not teaching him about honesty and respect, and taking responsibility for his choices. She said they were ashamed of what Lucas had done and understood if I never wanted to hear from them again. The letter was only half a page and didn't make excuses or ask for anything, just acknowledged that they'd failed somewhere as parents. I appreciated the gesture even though it didn't change what happened or make up for the $8,000 Lucas stole from me. At least they recognized that Lucas's behavior reflected on them too, that they'd raised someone who thought stealing from his girlfriend to fund his ex's lifestyle was acceptable. I put the letter in a drawer and decided I wouldn't respond, but I wouldn't throw it away either. The volunteer training session introduced me to other people who'd experienced financial abuse in relationships. One woman named Sarah had her husband drain their joint account to pay for his gambling addiction. Another guy named Mark had his boyfriend take out credit cards in his name and max them out before disappearing. Hearing their stories made me realize how common financial betrayal was, and how many people blamed themselves for not seeing the warning signs sooner. During the break, a man around my age approached me and introduced himself as Jake. He said he'd been volunteering with the program for about a year after his ex-wife cleaned out their savings account and left him with massive debt. We talked for a while about our experiences, and he made me laugh with his dark humor about the whole situation. Jake gave me his number and said I should text him if I ever wanted to grab coffee and compare notes about recovering from financial disasters. Something about the way he smiled made me actually want to text him, which surprised me since I hadn't been interested in anyone since Lucas. Jake and I started texting regularly and eventually met for coffee like he'd suggested. He was easy to talk to and genuinely seemed to understand what I'd been through without making me feel stupid or naive for trusting Lucas. We went on a few casual dates over the next month, and I appreciated that he never pushed for anything physical or tried to rush into a serious relationship. Jake respected my boundaries and was patient with my trust issues in a way that felt refreshing and healthy after Lucas's manipulation. He'd text to check in but didn't get upset if I took a while to respond. He'd suggest plans but didn't sulk if I needed to reschedule. He talked openly about his own therapy and healing process, which made me feel less broken for still working through my issues. Dating Jake felt completely different from dating Lucas, because everything was transparent and honest, instead of built on lies and hidden agendas. Victoria made 3 more restitution payments of $50 each over the next few months. Then suddenly the payments stopped coming and I didn't receive anything for 2 months straight. I called Nicholas and he said he'd contact her probation officer to find out what was happening. The probation officer called me back and said Victoria had apparently moved without updating her address, and they were trying to locate her. Nicholas explained that Victoria had probably disappeared on purpose to avoid making payments, which happened frequently in restitution cases. He said we could try to track her down, but it would cost money and time with no guarantee of success. I thought about it for a few days and finally decided to let it go. I'd gotten back most of my money through other means, and spending more time and energy chasing Victoria felt like letting her continue to control my life. I accepted that I'd probably never get the full $8,000 from her, and focused on moving forward instead of staying angry about money I might never see. 1 year after discovering Lucas's betrayal, I sat in my apartment and took stock of my life. I was dating Jake, and our relationship was healthy and honest in ways I didn't know were possible after Lucas. I'd gotten a better job at a different dental lab with a significant raise that boosted my savings even more. My emergency fund was rebuilt, and actually bigger than before, because I'd learned to be more careful with money. I had genuine happiness that came from within, instead of depending on someone else to make me feel worthwhile. The betrayal had changed me, but it hadn't broken me like Lucas probably hoped it would. I was stronger, wiser, more careful about who I trusted, but still capable of being generous and kind to people who deserved it. Victoria and Lucas had tried to destroy me financially and emotionally, but instead they just taught me valuable lessons about protecting myself while still staying open to good people and healthy relationships. 2 months after Victoria stopped making payments, Chloe called me with news that made me smile for the first time in what felt like forever. She was engaged to her boyfriend Noah and wanted me to be one of her bridesmaids. I sat on my couch holding the phone and feeling this warmth spread through my chest because Chloe said I was one of the best friends she'd ever had. The whole situation with Lucas and Victoria had been awful and painful and had cost me thousands of dollars, but it also brought Chloe into my life. She'd been brave enough to stand up against Victoria and testify about things that could have made her own life difficult. We'd bonded over coffee and shared frustration about Victoria's complete lack of accountability, and somehow that terrible situation had created a real friendship. I told Chloe I'd be honored to be her bridesmaid, and we started talking about wedding colors and dress styles like normal friends do. It felt good to focus on something happy and positive instead of dwelling on everything Lucas had stolen from me. 3 weeks later, Jake and I went out to dinner at this Italian place downtown that had amazing pasta. We were waiting for our table when I saw someone familiar standing near the bar. It took me a second to place him, but then I recognized Brad's assistant manager from the sporting goods store where Lucas used to work. He noticed me at the same time and walked over looking slightly uncomfortable. He asked how I was doing, and I said I was good. Then there was this awkward pause before he mentioned that he'd heard Lucas was working at some retail store in another state. Lucas had apparently moved back in with his parents after getting out of jail and was basically starting his whole life over from scratch. The assistant manager said Lucas's parents had come into the store once to pick up his final paycheck, and they looked embarrassed and wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. Hearing that Lucas was still dealing with consequences for his choices gave me this sense of closure I didn't know I needed. He wasn't just going to bounce back and pretend nothing happened. His actions had real lasting effects on his life and his family's life. I thanked the assistant manager for telling me and went back to Jake feeling lighter than I had in months. My relationship with Jake kept getting more serious as the months went by. He was nothing like Lucas in any way that mattered. Jake was honest about his finances and never made me feel like I had to support him or pay for everything. He had a stable job as an accountant and actually contributed equally when we went out or bought groceries together. He was genuinely supportive of my volunteer work with the financial literacy program and never made me feel guilty for having boundaries about money. He talked openly about his own past relationship mistakes and what he'd learned from therapy, which made me feel safe being vulnerable about my trust issues. He never got defensive when I needed reassurance or wanted to talk through my anxiety about being taken advantage of again. Dating him showed me what a healthy relationship actually looked like after spending 2 years with someone who was actively stealing from me and lying every single day. I was grateful that Lucas's betrayal hadn't completely destroyed my ability to trust someone new. He proved that not everyone was out to use me, and that being generous and kind didn't automatically make me a target for manipulation. I was sitting in my apartment one Sunday morning drinking coffee and thinking about how much my life had changed in the past year and a half. I was planning a real future with Jake, someone who actually respected me and treated me like an equal partner instead of an ATM machine. The financial literacy program I volunteered with had helped dozens of people recognize the warning signs of financial abuse in their relationships. I'd rebuilt my emergency fund, and it was actually bigger than before because I'd learned to be smarter about protecting my money. My friendship with Chloe had grown into something genuine and meaningful. My job at the dental lab was going well, and I'd gotten another small raise. Life felt genuinely good in a way that seemed impossible when I first discovered what Lucas had been doing. I was proud of how I'd handled everything instead of just falling apart and letting them win. Lucas and Victoria had tried to destroy me financially and emotionally, but instead they'd just made me stronger and wiser. I still had moments where I felt angry about the money Victoria would probably never pay back, but mostly I felt grateful that I'd caught them when I did, before they could steal even more. The whole experience had taught me that being kind and generous wasn't the problem, but I needed to be careful about who deserved that kindness. I'd survived something that could have broken me and come out the other side better than before.